So I'm the Chief Innovation Officer at Scott Logic, and I kind of sit in that sweet spot between business and technology. But how do you use tech to kind of drive value? So whether it's efficiency or growth within businesses. And I've been doing it, I've about 30 years career. So I've been doing it a long time. Data science back in the day, 15 years ago when it was big data and we were doing predictive analytics, and that was trendy, and now agentic's trendy, and we're kind of going faster and faster, it seems. So hopefully give you some insights into some of the things we're working on as well across clients, especially in Q&A. More than happy to do that. So adopting agentic. There's a lot of hype. You can't miss the hype, can you? It's kind of everywhere. But the majority of organisations are struggling to some extent, whether or not they admit to that or not, but they're facing challenges. And those challenges can be kind of bucketed into 5 key areas. 2/3 of organisations say there's either regulatory constraints or there's constraints within their legacy systems. So they've got data islands, for example, or they've got old CRM systems, so they're struggling with we've got like decades worth of technology and decades worth of data. How the heck are we going to put on this like fast-paced agents on top of it? So there's some challenges around that. And then, whether you're in public sector, you're in financial services, whether or not you're in, consulting, you're kind of looking at regulated markets, and you've got to work out, what data you can use, how you use it, how you control it, what the access is. So that for a lot of organizations, legacy and then regulation is the big issue. Data quality, we hear it all the time, don't we? It's kind of, data is the new gold, data's got to be good enough for your agents and stuff. But it really is. Once you come to use it, your agents are only as good as the data they've got, and they'll make misinformed decisions for you, and you'll get not just hallucinations on the decision-making side, but also on the actions that they take as well. So it's more and more important to get your data and make it discoverable as well. So you've got to be able to find it. You've got to have the metadata tags. You've got to have it unstructured data organised within your environment. They get stuck in proof of concepts. So, kind of get this Armageddon of, kind of proof of concept after proof of concept. And I'll touch on a little bit of that later of why that happens, why a lot of organizations do that. I've been doing this Gen AI stuff since ChatGPT came out 3 years ago, 3.5 years ago, 4 years ago, whatever it was. And we did loads of proof of concepts with customers. They were spending £30,000 to £50,000. And now you look back and go, well, of course it can do that. Of course it can generate a document for you. Of course it can do a contract for you. And so the technology moves quite quickly, but there's a reason why companies get caught there quite often. And we can talk about that. And if you've got any questions, we can explore it a bit more as well. The fourth thing is people don't know where to start. So is it your front office? Is it your back office? Is it your data? Where do you start? It's like everything's changing all at once, all at the same time across industries. And so it's quite often difficult for people to kind of pin down, where's the value, where should I start, how do I break things down? So that's the fourth reason. And then the fifth reason, which is, I'd argue, is probably the biggest one, is about people and culture. Now people, because there are many reasons for that. Some is resistance. There's horror stories we're all going to lose our jobs and bots are going to take over. And so there's resistance within organizations. If you work in back office, why should you cooperate with a project that's probably going to make you redundant or out of a job? And so there's some kind of psychological stuff going on there in that space. But then also the pace of change of this technology, I've never seen anything like it. You really do have to have an innovation mindset. You do be able to have experiments, to fail, to take risks within organizations. And most organizations aren't set up for that. They're set up for efficiency and operational optimization. And so those two things don't fit together. And so that people and culture piece is often, in my experience, the biggest thing that holds people back. So that's the challenges. So how do we face these challenges? That's what I'm going to talk about, hopefully. So what are leading firms doing? So the first firm I want to talk about is JP Morgan. So the world's biggest bank. They are taking a two-pronged approach. So they're taking top down and bottom up, and they're running these two things in parallel. So top down, what are they doing? They're looking at enterprise solutions. So they've got their IT teams, their technology teams, their data teams, all working together, and they've got big bets that they're putting on their business. So they're going, back office automation. Yep, that's a big program of work. We're going to look at how we restructure that. We're going to reimagine our workflows. We're going to take a lot of cost out of our business. Call centers, again, similar sort of thing. How do I improve service, but also take out costs at the same time? Sales enablement, how do I get better sales plans? Software engineering, they're a big investor in technology. They spend billions of dollars on it. And then fraud and error as well. So they're taking big chunks of their business and they're saying at a strategic level, we're going to invest hundreds of millions of pounds in transforming our business through Agentic. And to do this, going back to my point about people, is they've had to train their leaders. So they've had to train their leaders to rethink how they do business. And what they've done in that is to say, you cannot just automate what you've got today. That doesn't work because you might get 10% efficiency. We're talking about game-changing stuff here. So you have to reimagine how your business works, how your back office is going to work, how your customer engagement is going to work. You have to have the ability to think beyond linearly. You have to take a jump. So they've had to train their top leadership team across the firm to be able to encourage them to think differently. And then the second thing is, as part of that, is reimagining those businesses and being brave about it. And that's what I mean about that cultural thing. It's kind of being brave about the big steps, the big bets that they're putting on. And they really are putting some big bets on in that space. So that's one stream. And then the other stream is bottom up. And that's about employee innovation. So employee innovation, a lot of co-working tools, for example, is basically what they're doing. And they've rolled it out to 250,000 employees across their organisation globally. I mean, that's a massive feat, right? And they're using it for things like we would every day. So there's summarising documents, producing reports, getting insights, prepping for my next meeting. So what they did is they put in a platform, and so you can select and draw down your own models from there. So they've got standard models. They're running like ChatGPT, and they'll be running 4.2 rather than the latest frontier version. So that they have pre-selected models for people, and those models do certain jobs within it. But the point is, what they've done is they put a platform in place. They've secured that. They put guardrails around that platform, and so nobody can access and their data doesn't leave their environment. It stays in their environment with their tools and their guardrails and platforms. And so they've done that at an enterprise level. And then the other big thing they've done is they've educated people as well. So they've educated, and then they've continued to add data sets, and new models as they come along. And what they're trying to do is obviously the security, and they don't want their data leaving the building. And two, they want to avoid grey IT, because we can very easily get into a point where we've got like spreadsheet 2.0. And so, a whole business that runs on a spreadsheet that Jeff has made, and only he knows how it's kind of connected to other spreadsheets, and actually our P&L runs off that, and he's on holiday. There is a danger that if you're running a lot of your business on co-working tools and they're not done on a framework and they're not done on a platform, you could end up with that scenario where Jeff's got it running on his desktop and he's not here. So what do you do then?
So when you say guardrails and you're talking about securing data in and out, obviously you're not talking about going out to your large language model. You're talking about maybe what's being produced going out.
So if you we can talk about it later, but if you put a platform in place and you have your models in there, and then you have your data segregated within that platform as well, and it's the only way that it can work. So you can't. It's not an external model. It's using a private connection, through like Foundry or something on Azure. But yeah. So that's JP Morgan. So going a different industry. So what are Walmart doing? So Walmart. They're really leading. If you want to do some research and find out what leading firms are doing, they're really good. They've got loads of stuff out there. They publish it quite a lot, and they've got 4 super agents that they use across their business. And the first one is for customers, and what they've seen is 35% increase in basket sizes, because a little assistant is helping you going, oh, have you forgotten this? Have you done that? And it's kind of like a little assistant that's helping you shop. You shop online, it's on your phone, you go into the store. So that's one segment and one super agent. It's actually a collection of agents underneath, and they keep adding to it in a similar way. The next one is one for employees, and this is an assistant that helps, in store, for example. So I'm there, where are the shred is, what aisle are they on, and stuff like that. But it's also an employee agent that helps them with their HR matters. So what's the policy? How much holiday have I got left? And those types of activities as well. So that's a super agent for their employees. And then they've got one for partners, and the partners is a lot of it is around, it's either marketing agencies or procurement, and there's a lot of stuff on procurement on the commercial side. And so for what they've done, for example, is they've said, right, I'm negotiating with Nestle. What is the best price I should get in Texas for Cheerios from Nestle? And it will produce a sales plan for them and what they should be negotiating with. And then it says, right, okay, I've done that deal. Based on our master services agreement, create me a contract that goes to Nestle off the back of that. And so they started to look at value streams for their procurement and their partners as well. So they think they've driven out about 3% of supplier costs. And if you can imagine how many billions that is to someone like Walmart, that's a lot of money. So that's 3 of their super agents. And then the 4th one is for developers. And I say agent, and I've got the star there, because it's actually multiple agents. And they're looking, and we might hear about this later, they're looking at their whole software development life cycle and where they use agents along it. So not just to do coding, but then also to do like testing, requirements gathering, and how do you kind of piece that whole thing together. And then even deployment, and you get onto your CI/CD and kind of automation type stuff. So they see accelerated time to market, velocity of their software, new features internally and with customers externally. And I don't know if you can see that there, but the customer one's called Sparky, which I thought was kind of funny. I thought Marks and Spencer's might be pissed off with that. They kind of nicked it. They're kind of the little Sparky assistant. But so I would look up Walmart. I think they've got some really good examples, and they're quite happy to share these things. And behind it, they've got a platform, and there's lots of stuff you can see about that as well. So the third and final sort of big firm I want to talk about is Norge Bank. So now back to finance. They've got this strategy, which is to cut their manual processes by 50% by 2028. So quite a short time horizon. And I think it's really interesting how they've gone about it. So there's a saying by Steve Jobs, which is you can only join the dots backwards, you can't join them forwards. And so it's easy to say, oh, look, we insource our back office, we go on the cloud, we sort our data out, then we can do agentic. And they're quite honest in saying we didn't really know that we were going to go on that journey, but we just accidentally got to this position. But they finished their data warehouse, I think they're on Databricks the last year or 2, and then they started to move towards AI adoption across the firm and to drive this 50% of cost savings on automation. And this is kind of how they've done it. So they appointed and trained up AI ambassadors across the firm. So this is part of somebody's day job, but they're now an ambassador and they're in the back office or they're in sales support. So they created a team of ambassadors, and they became the voice and the champions. And right back to that point I said about at the beginning about people and culture, these guys were like front and center of that. The second thing is they upskilled everybody. So the whole organization, a bit like Morgan Stanley with the 250,000 people, they trained everybody. They trained everybody on the tools, on the data responsibilities, on the opportunities about thinking about non-linear changes, not just kind of linear changes. And then what they've done is they've settled on a number of key tools as well. So they've got Claude and Gemini as their key enterprise tools, and then Cursor they're using on the software side. So it's ambassadors training, and then clear tools that they're using in a structured platform. And then they've done another couple of things. They put clear governance around it. So they put governance around things you can do on your own, with your own data, with your own tools, as part of your job, and then things that require cross-department work. And so they've got a really quick and easy way to get people working together across different teams, so you don't get silos. And then they coupled with this with a small centre of excellence. So they've got a small team who go out there, and they're an enablement team. They kind of sit with the businesses, get them up and running, get them spinning, and then on to the next one. And they're finding that this is actually kind of percolating and creating a wave of innovation across the whole firm. So, what are some of the key insights? So there's one set of tools which are co-work tools. So I've talked a lot about those, and they're the things that we'll all be familiar with. On your laptop and you're talking to Claude, I've got this bill, what do I do with it? Give me some advice and stuff. So there's a whole group of opportunities within the organisation for co-work transformation. Then there's business transformation. So whether it's the back office, the call centres, sales, etc. So the big sort of plays within organisations. And then finally, software engineering, which has really accelerated in terms of the way that we build software. The last sort of 6 to 9 months has just changed dramatically, and Colin can talk a bit more about that later. So I'm going to just take each one of these really quickly. On the co-work tools, what do? Well, they train their people, and they kept doing it. They keep doing it. They're still doing it. So that's number one takeaway. They enabled the safe use of the guardrails on a standard platform, which I talked about. That is so important to put that in place. And it's not hugely expensive and hugely complex thing to do, but it needs to be done. Otherwise, you get these stranded proof of concepts. And then the third thing is they continually add more models, more agents, more data, because that's the thing that keeps people coming back. Because it's continually changing. It's just not like, that it's just that. They're continually looking at innovating and bringing new features to it. On software engineering, they train their people, they train their devs, but they considered, as I kind of hinted at earlier, the whole software development life cycle, not just what engineers do, but what are product people doing around capturing requirements and wireframing? What are testing people doing in validating the features and the safety of the software? What are people doing in DevOps? So they're looking at that whole end-to-end life cycle. And then they're setting clear targets as well. So the targets might be velocity. So it might just be the speed that we can build features at. It might be the cost. We've got some great examples of firms that we're working with where we've brought in the time for a legacy migration by months, and the cost, hundreds of thousands of pounds of savings by using agentic software engineering. So there's great prizes to be there, but they're measured by KPIs that are going to drive that difference in performance. And then on the business transformation side, as I mentioned earlier, they trained their leaders to think differently. And this is really important because quite often, I think in organizations, senior leaders, they don't necessarily have that sort of training of this is new technology, this is new data. It kind of like just goes by. They're almost expected to know it by osmosis. But all of these organizations, double down on actually training their leaders as well to think differently at the kind of exec level out. And then they reimagined their operating models. They didn't, as I mentioned earlier, they didn't just automate what they've got today. They reimagined their organizations, their operating models, their ways of working. And then they set clear targets in terms of value creation. And this one here, this is so important. And doing these big bets is this reimagining bit. You just really got to spend time reimagining. Otherwise, you just get incremental efficiency gains. So, I'm on the final hurdle now. What can you do? So, if we consider just what I started the conversation with about legacy integration work, data not available, it's a bit crap, people and culture, you get stuck in proof of concepts and you don't know where to start. Maybe one or two or some of those apply to you in your organization. So 3 things that you can do. One is be clear about what type of agentic you're talking about. So is it co-working tools and enabling people to do their job faster, quicker, smarter? Is it about transforming your business and taking costs out or improving your customer service, driving basket size up? Is it business transformation, or is it software engineering and actually it's features before your competitors, time to market and stuff like that. So just be super clear on what one of those 3 you're looking at. The second thing I think is to be clear on where you are on your journey, and this comes back to this proof of concept point, because I don't know if you can see that at the back there, but if you go kind of like across a classic consulting model, you go from explore. So back here it's like, I want to work out, what I should do. Then you say, look, well, are we ready? Where should we start? That comes back to that question. Then even design, you're like, okay, well, what's our end state? Where are we heading to? We don't need to know all the details, but we need to know kind of our blueprint of where we're going. Then you need to pilot and build really quickly. You kind of need to fail fast, do that kind of whole agile innovation stuff, then scale, then operate. And what happens, as what's been happening the last couple of years, is people miss this bit out. They miss out assess and design, and they go straight from, right, we've had a workshop, we had PwC in, or Scott Logic, whoever it is, but I've had these guys in and we've got 5 ideas, and one of them is for a call center, POC, and we're going to make the conversations between our telephone staff and our customers much better because they're going to get a personalized report of the customer. And so they don't bother going, are we ready? Are our people ready? Have we got the data? Have all those things ready? They don't bother designing the guardrails and things like that. So they end up rapidly building, because the tools do enable you to build rapidly, and then they end up building something that can only ever stay in a proof of concept because it hasn't got the guardrails, it's not got secure access to data, people haven't been trained on it. And so a lot of organizations then kind of have to go back and think about the bigger picture. So my second bit of advice is, working with a lot of people is, be clear on where you are and kind of adapt your needs and your activities around that part of the journey. And the third thing is build a platform. So if I haven't banged on about this enough, the platform is so important. It's really important because that's what gives you your guardrails. It means your organization, especially if you're in a regulated environment, your data's not being kind of used outside, it's not being used to train a model or any of those things. And that typically looks like you've got your agent management orchestration layer, your security around it. So each agent should be a first-class citizen, so it should have access rights, just like an individual does. You should be able to trace and limit the access, for example, that an agent's got. And then orchestrating what APIs can it use. MCPs are the way that it talks to different things and gets actions done. Make sure you've got that design right. Your data, so where's your unstructured data? It's got to be able to find it as well, so it's got to be tagged. You've got to have some kind of semantic layer or understanding to that. And then you've got connections to your domain systems. That might be your CRM system that you've currently got, your back office system, your procurement system, whatever it is. But you've got to think about that in terms of kind of a holistic package. And then I've got a fourth one for free, which is bring the people along. I mean, again, if I haven't banged on about that enough, but that's the people. So it's platform and people are two of the key things, and then being clear on where you are on your journey. So in summary, from looking at kind of like what's publicly available, but also from our experiences, successful enterprises probably do 4 things. Well, they reimagine their operating model and their to-be blueprint. That's fun. That's really essential to be able to see. That's kind of almost like your North Star of like where you're heading to. They put the enabling platform and tools in place, so they do it safely, securely, and they're designing for production from the start. They make the data available, but with guardrails, so it's got access management rights, for example. And then fourthly, they educate their people continuously. And I think this is something that, we're guilty of it internally ourselves. We've trained our own software engineers, a few months back, but we need to do it again because now we're kind of rapidly becoming on the path to becoming an Anthropic, Claude partner. So we've got to train everybody again, and the tools change so quickly that you kind of like don't know what you don't know until you kind of like shown. So I think the next few years are going to be really interesting as we grow, and I think one of the important things is as we bring new staff on, or jobs are removed, is training people as well within this space. And I was at a conference last week, and there's a really interesting take on young people coming in, because now we see the news that, the sort of recent graduates are finding it difficult to get jobs, and people are really worried that there's not going to be entry-level jobs and stuff like that. And somebody made a really good point, I thought. It's like, he said, yeah, but we're still imagining them working like we were when we were graduates, and you went in and you did some research and you did the crappy jobs. But those jobs, we need to reimagine jobs for graduates or apprentices coming through because they're different. And he said, I think we're in a time of like transition from what we expected. Of course, that doesn't work in an agentic world, but in an agentic world, we need to reimagine what we do want people to do and how we want them to think and act. And there's a lot of truth in that, I think. So I think that's it. That's me done. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you.